Well, it shows me what I think we've all known. He's what's called a useful idiot. I mean, if you actually read translations of what's being said on Russian media, they make fun of him. I mean, he's like a puppy dog.
Well, Vladimir Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson was his first one-on-one interview with Western media since 2019. He used the occasion to push for recognition of Moscow's interests and depicted Russia as a victim of Western betrayal and fearmongering. Conservative talk show host Tucker Carlson's a former Fox News anchor, an ally of Donald Trump, and a vocal opponent of US military aid for Ukraine. He travelled to Moscow to speak to the Russian president. Here are some excerpts from their conversation, which was broadcast on the Tucker Carlson network.
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat.
Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why? Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else.
I think you're saying you want a negotiated settlement to what's happening in Ukraine.
We're willing to negotiate. It is the Western side, and Ukraine is obviously a satellite state of the US. This endless mobilization in Ukraine, the hysteria, the domestic problems, sooner or later it will result in agreement.
Do you think it's too humiliating at this point for NATO to accept Russian control of what was 2 years ago Ukrainian territory?
Up until now, there has been the uproar and screaming about inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield. Now they are apparently coming to realize that it is difficult to achieve, if possible at all. In my opinion, it is impossible by definition. It is never going to happen.
Why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi. Shall we end here, or is there anything else?
No, I think that's great.
Just for the record, I also have an alibi. As you can imagine, reactions to that interview from around the world have been swift and critical, with many political figures ridiculing it and dismissing it as a useful propaganda tool for Putin.
We saw nothing new in Putin's interview. He repeated old lies, distortions, and manipulations, and displayed a great deal of hostility towards the West, which is not new. And we regret that Putin has actually provided a platform to manipulate and spread propaganda.
Tucker Carlson is in Moscow right now interviewing Vladimir Putin.
Right. I would not be surprised if he emerges with a contract with a Russian outlet, because he is a useful idiot. He says things that are not true. He parrots Vladimir Putin's pack of lies about Ukraine. So I don't see why Putin wouldn't give him an interview.
Putin reinforced his well-known lies about Ukraine. These are dangerous lies, as he has used them as so-called justification for Russia's illegal and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine.
Well, let's pick this up with Sergey Radchenko, who is a professor at the Henry A. Kissinger Center for Global Affairs and the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He's written extensively on the Cold War, nuclear history, and Russian foreign and security policy. Welcome to DW. Why do you think President Putin agreed to this interview with a Western journalist, having refused other such requests since 2019?
I think he wants to speak to a particular audience in the United States, i.e. audience to him, to whom Tucker Carlson speaks, the American far right, those people who are President Trump's base. Those will slurp up this interview like it's the most delicious thing. I mean, they don't know the nuances of this conflict, and they feel that this is Biden's war. They want Trump to solve this problem for them in one day.
And so, what if he feeds them that line? Then what? How does that benefit Putin sitting in Moscow?
Well, it benefits Putin in the longer term. He is, of course, monitoring what is happening in the United States very closely. He knows that the United States is in the middle of pre-electoral chaos. And obviously, we have elections coming up in November. He's counting on Donald Trump to win in those elections. And he's sort of speaking to both Donald Trump and, to those people around him, but also to that part of the American public who are tired about Ukraine and who are perhaps most gullible to take everything that Putin says and take it as sacred truth.
Do you think we learned anything from this encounter?
There was very, very little. The interview was very strange. It started with a long discourse into Russian history going back to the 9th century. I think Carlson did not expect that. Putin showed himself manipulative as ever, showing documents, etc., etc. I mean, stuff that we've known about and we've seen him talk about. But this is sort of his way to justify his war of aggression against Ukraine. It is for him to root it in some deep historical issues that go back 1,000 years. And then he talked about things like the peace talks that failed in March, April 2022. There was very little new that he said there. He ridiculed Germany at one point, which I thought was a nuance, a new thing. Well, not necessarily a new thing. He ridiculed Germany previously, but he sort of suggested that Germany has doesn't understand its own national interest, that its own national interest should be in importing gas from Russia and not listening to Poland or to the United States. So overall, I would say there was almost zero new stuff in there and a lot of propaganda.
Okay. So you've said this is Mr. Putin playing to an American right-wing audience. How do you think this will have played with the Russian public? Has it had much airing there?
I think it has. I mean, the Russians loved Carlson. The moment he showed up in Moscow, red carpets were rolled out for him. He was taken from place to place. It's very interesting with the Russians. They claim that they have rejected the West, but here they really just rolled out the red carpet for this American journalist and wanted to impress him in every possible way that they could. So for many Russians, including for the elite, the West continues to be something of an object of a love-hate relationship. They really hate it, but they also admire it, and they feel inferior to it, and they want to draw people like Carlson over to their side.
Good talking to you. Thanks for sharing your insights with us. Sergey Radchenko from the Henry A. Kissinger Center for Global Affairs and the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies.
Thank you for having me today.